Andrea Petrone is here with me today. Welcome, sir.
Hi, Dave. Good to see you. To see you and be here today with you.
Good to see you as well. You're calling in, you're dialing in here from the UK, is my understanding. I'll give everyone a brief kind of synopsis of what you're all about and where you're coming from. So I just want to say this: the only reason we're talking today is you posted something on LinkedIn. I'm going to say about a year ago, and I responded to it. We went back and forth, and I also listened to a couple of your podcasts, and I thought, wow, this is a like-minded guy, and I just wanted to say something to you, and you responded, and then through that interaction, we ended up on this episode today. So you're in the UK, and you're a performance coach, an executive coach, and today we're going to focus on mindset, performance, leadership, and things of that nature. So we're going to kind of talk about your career, your experiences. I know you have a book coming out in about 6 months, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. But before we dive in any further, is there anything you want to say or anything I missed to help bring some context to this conversation?
No, I think you covered the territory perfectly. Yes. So, um, performance and executive coach, working primarily with the CEOs and the CEOs, the C-suite, if you like, on individual basis, but also as a team and sometimes as a team development, most of the time on a strategic initiative in order to really accelerate performance in what they're doing. So really much into the business, if you like. On the other part that you said, yes, I have a podcast, the World Class Leader Show. It's successful. I'm interviewing actually CEOs, so it's an opportunity to understand what's going on in their life, understand what they're up to, and maybe sharing lessons. And finally, as you said, I'm about to complete my book about CEOs, leaving a legacy, bringing humanity into the equation. So explaining why humanity is actually an enabler for performance, which, as you know, it might not be necessarily top of mind for many CEOs, but that's what the book is going to be.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, and I actually neglected to give the name of the podcast. It's the World Class Leaders Show, and you can download that or access
Yeah.
that via Apple. Is there any? Can you watch on YouTube as well? Or
It's now on YouTube too. Yes. So we moved as well the interviews on YouTube because we realized that it's a different channel and people wants to see people, and that creates a different kind of, relationship, trust, empathy. So
got it.
yes.
Got it. So before we get in to the specifics of the topic, kind of walk me through your background, how you started your career, and then maybe we can just build off of that.
Yeah, look, I think I have quite interesting career progression and development, if you like, because I started as many people that that do what we do I started in corporate. So I work in a corporate for many years. I had the fortune to work outside of my comfort zone because I work in West Africa, North Africa for most of years. So I created since early days a very international footprint. And that was for me one of probably the most impactful experience I had because I started to learn about different cultures and actually my learning curve has exponentially increased compared to all my buddies, in my own town because I'm coming from a small town from northern Italy. So for more than 20 years, I work around the globe. So 7 different countries, different continents. So I did my things by the age of 35. I already got to the top. So I got to managing director, CEO of a joint venture, and everything was really working fine. So it's one of those things that happen very fast. So very happy. Um, and then as many, I realized that I am actually I can fail. So I'm not so invincible as I thought I was at the time. So I had a couple of not, if you like, super impactful experiences. And then made me realize that I was maybe looking for the wrong thing. I was looking for success. I was looking for career. I was looking for ambition and all of that, which is still valid, but probably I was taking the bad side of it. I was too much, you know, eager to succeed. And I realized that there was a part of me, my sense of humanity, etc., that was there, but I just suppressed it because I didn't think that was important. So that moment in time was kind of pivotal for me. That was the first big moment. I hired a coach for the first time, and there was an ex and a really incredible experience for me. I learned that humility actually is a great thing. And since that time, I started my career 2.0. That was the second version of my career. and it was completely different the way I show up as a leader. And not surprisingly, I ended up to be even more successful than the first part. And then led me to the UK to lead a consulting gig. And then I created early 2019 after being certified. I created my own practices, leadership performance. And this probably the other epiphany was at the end of 18, I realized, okay, where am I, as many people at some point in life ask myself, where am I going here? So what's the purpose for me? And I just reconnected the dots. I closed myself, which is interesting story. I closed myself for 2 weeks in a kind of a lounge that is close where we live. Closed, but I shut up all phones, all distraction, or mobiles. I made sure that I finish all my work by mid of December for the company at that time. And I spent 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks every single day to think about me, myself, the purpose, the past, connected all the dots. And then I realized after I think 3 or 4 days, here's the epiphany. I got an insight, said, okay, that's my path. That's what I want to do. And after that, it was a really quick thing. In a couple of weeks, already enrolled in an executive coach training course in Florida, and then the rest of history. I started to work with global clients quite early days, and now is working with many different clients from different industries across the globe, from North America to Saudi Arabia. It's been an amazing journey. And now, the book and the podcast, just, different things I'm creating for my next step. So that's where I'm.
That was great. That brings me up to speed. It actually triggered a bunch of other questions. So, unlike you, my only experience is in the US. I've worked with people from different countries, but primarily my experience is in the US.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what it must be like to have been in 7 countries, 7 different cultures. I can go from company to company here and find different cultures and ways of being, and what works in one doesn't necessarily work in another, or the way people think is different. But when it comes to mindset, leadership, and success or performance, what have you observed to be similarities or differences from culture to culture? The reason I say that, the reason I'm bringing this up is I think about my own experiences going from one organization to another in the
Yes.
US. And what was deemed success in one is just not in another. And that's in the same country, maybe even in the same industry. But what about country to country? What did you learn about yourself, or what did you learn about these categories as you've experienced the different cultures that you've been in?
Yeah. Look, it's a really interesting conversation because there are some differences in how leadership shows up in these countries and from one country into another. And by the way, I expect in the US, even if you're talking from, from east to west, there are already some major difference, because most of the micro environments, in countries so big as US, they're actually similar to, you know, different kind of a culture in different country for smaller country. Anyway, I think is look, my lessons has been a number of lessons. I think the number one has been um adapting to a different culture is complicated, is really difficult, especially if you have some sort of experience in operating in countries where, you know, culture, leadership, management, people, so humanity, as a higher level is just different. So I work in a country where there was a dictatorship. I work in a country where there was no freedom to talk. I work in a country where everyone needs to work in the same way. They needs to operate in the same way. Otherwise, you are considered, outside of society. I operate in a country where family or sport is more important than work. So it's so interesting how different cultures actually play a role into our leadership development. And I would say for me, the major learning has been you can really adapt to a culture, especially look, I mean, let me rephrase it. When I always say is you coming from a culture A, that's your nature, right? That's your set of values, that's your set of behaviors, that you where you grow up, you consistently show up the same values in the way how you are as a person, as an individual, and then you transfer that into the role of leader if you ended up leading an organization. When you join a different culture that's so distant from your own culture, there are two different possible options. So one is you feel so much ingrained into new culture, it becomes like your new culture. But that's not a positive outcome, because at that point, if you do that, and I've seen many people do it, you completely delete your culture. You forget about your values. You lose your roots, because you're so much looking forward to be part of the new community, and you start to emulate people, copy and paste what other people do. So it could be useful maybe to operate in that culture, but you're losing your identity, who you are, right? So that's one option. The second option is you disregard in your culture, you just, stick with your own way of being, but that doesn't necessarily work if you need to operate with people that are very different than who you are. I learned that there is actually a third path, and the third path is getting the best out of both cultures, yours and new cultures, and try to work and live in a very hybrid way. So you, instead of having culture A or B, so it's not binary description, it's more a culture C, where you're trying to get the most out of the best cultures, and you start operating in that way. By doing so, you create more discovery. You become more aware of what is working, what is not working, and you only get the best out of what is already what you experience, from a cultural standpoint. And that's to me as a massive learning in leadership, because I've seen leaders fall into either option A or either option B, and they really fail at some point to either adapt to the new culture or to be so much ingrained into the culture they lost completely the connection of who they are. So they turn to be someone else they were not supposed to be in the first place. So that's to me, if you want, if we want to summarize in one single lesson, that's what it is.
When was the first time in your life that you actually found yourself in a coaching role or a mentorship role? It might have even been when you were a child, where all of a sudden you're helping a friend or a family member learn how to throw a baseball
Yeah.
or ride a bike or something. Like, when's the first time you found that you had kind of a knack for doing that work or a desire to do that work?
It's maybe it's not a surprise for you, but I started actually when I was 18, 19, when I started to be a soccer coach. So the football year in Europe. So passionate about football, and I started to coach young people. And then for many years, I thought, by the way, which is interesting, I thought that was my career because I was quite successful. Things were actually unfolding in the right way. And then I started to, university, and then I got my first job because that was not full-time job anyway. And then I needed to make a choice. I made a choice to work internationally. So I decided to follow that more, I would say, solid, opportunity. But that was my first experience. And that was probably the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing now. Is something was already in my mind in supporting others to grow, as I think that's what motivates you too. I mean, it's not something that you realize, only at the age when you launch a practice. It's something in the back of your mind. And it was for me for many years.
What do you see? What are the correlations between coaching a soccer team and, say, coaching an executive team?
Well, I would say the look, as we always say, there are so many correlations between sport team and business team. Many. And for many years, I think as a leader, we've been trying to create a connection between the two. We bring sports experience either as a metaphor, so by inviting sport players to talk in front of business people, and that works. That works because the dynamics of creating a successful, a winning team, they're not different. They're definitely not different. So to me, I think it's the sense of trust is how sport people can create trust with each other. That's to me is the most important enabler to create something extraordinary as a team. And in sport, creating trust with team members is so important. Think about soccer, but it's applicable to any, basketball, American football, whatever. Is if you don't pass the ball to each other, if you're gonna go solo, because fundamentally because you don't trust other people or because you're putting yourself first. So that's not how a great team performs. And we know the best incredible winning, stories in sport are those people that were either underdogs or because they were not necessarily from a talent standpoint, a summary of incredible talented individuals, but actually as a team they created, something that was even better than the summary of each individual. So I think that is really the basic foundation of creating something incredible as a team.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the Boston Celtics right now, but
Right, right.
I want to talk to you about that because you share the ball more. Anyway, um, what about the idea of, and I don't want to make this about sports, but it is relevant in this regard. You take any team in any sport, eventually the players move on. They age out, they get hurt, they go to another team, whatever, and then the current team has to reinvent itself with new faces and new players while still
Right.
maintaining, say, a culture and identity. I find in business that that same thing has to happen, but sometimes it doesn't happen as fluidly as it maybe could or should, where the recruiting process or the looking down the road process for talent, or maybe forecasting that we may lose some good people. What will we do if that happens? What if this person goes away? What if this client goes away? What's the backup plan? Sports are, you have no choice but to recruit talent. I don't know that businesses recruit talent as effectively as they could or should. What's your take on that? And do you agree or disagree?
I agree. I agree. And I think is look, if I think about succession planning, for example, so let's start from that because I think it's a good, interesting conversation. So most of the succession planning in business, they're not working. It's just not working. So what we see, especially at really at the top table, I can tell you countless of conversation with CEOs or first line. They're saying, look, there is nobody ready to replace X or Y, or even the ECO itself. So it's not a surprise that most of the replacement at the top table are coming from people they are not operating the company. So it's still relatively a small proportion of promotions at the top table are coming in the business, in the company, compared to people that are hired from the outside world. And that's I think it's an interesting indication how leaders really are developing or not developing enough their leaders, the future leaders. For me, being work a lot with developing the new pipeline of leaders, I can tell you that there is this sort of probably laziness of not really spending enough resources and time to develop the new pipelines and then finding as an easy solution, as a shortcut, hiring people from outside just because it's easy. I don't think this intentionally because people they don't want to promote other people. I think it's just being part of the mechanism where business is so fast you don't have time to think about your talents. You want to do it but you don't have really the resources, the time to explore that. So when something happens, the easy solution, get someone from outside. And by the way, to some extent, in some specific situations, I endorse the decision of hiring someone from outside, but only when you want to, give a little bit of checking, all right, to the current condition, either because you're going to through a turnaround or you want to transform the company or you're going to complete different direction. So you need a different type of skills, but also most importantly, different type of mindset or attitudes in the organization. That's valid. That's absolutely valid. But that shouldn't be a reason why we're not developing leaders. So honestly, I think that is a conversation that is missing. And so I want to make sure that laziness is not prevailing from what is really supposed to be do, because I mean what leaders do is creating the new pipeline of leaders, and if nothing is coming from the bottom, though something is missing at the top. So that's my view.
I agree with you. The other thing about the laziness component is, could they be lazily promoting internally? They may think they're developing the internal pipeline of leaders, but they're promoting people that aren't ready yet. So because so and so has been here for 5 years or 7 years or whatever it is. So therefore, we move that individual here, but they're not necessarily ready to lead. They're only leading because of tenure or because they asked for a promotion or they wanted more money, but they're not ready to lead yet. A lot of them get there because they wanted to get there. I want the title. I want the promotion. It wasn't an organic, natural reason. Wow, you're really good at developing other people. This is a no-brainer decision.
Yeah.
What are your perspectives on that?
No, I agree. I'm with you. I mean, I think probably the major reason why when they get to make a decision about okay, who is gonna fill this role and nobody is considered ready, there is also an element of really bad not only planning but also poor understanding of what's gonna be the the skill that you need for the future. Because what you're in right now is probably will be very different what you're gonna need in 5 years time. And organizations that are not and leaders as well, they're not ready to, unfortunately, to think about the future. So they hire or they promote or develop people based on what they need right now and not what they need in the future. And that's to me, it's a lack of vision and aspiration for the future. So here's the interesting thing. Those organizations that are going through a proper leadership development programs for future leaders, very, very likely what they do, they trying to instill leadership tools, distinctions, etc., which is quite broad, difficult then to apply into the real world. That's one potential mistake. And the other mistake is they're just trying to hire people or to develop people based on specific skills. They are again necessary right now but not necessary in the future. So the question really is, are you really creating you know a future ready organization, or what you're trying to do right now is just looking at a very short term, you know, opportunistic to some extent leadership or growth opportunities. And that's to me is a pitfall.
Yeah, future ready is the key phrase, right? Future ready organization. I mean that to me is the answer. And how do you do that? Related to the three topics that I mentioned at the beginning: mindset, leadership, performance. When you think of mindset of any C-level individual, like, or I guess any person, what is an ideal mindset for somebody that's responsible for other people?
So I think there are different mindsets that would probably suggest considering. So, and that's what I'm trying to do in my book too, is talking about these mindsets. So look, if I probably consider few of them, the most impactful, I would say, first of all, is the ability to deal with ambiguity. This idea of dealing with in a very flexible way of all the rapid changes that are happening in organizations, given all the different dynamics, market forces, etc., that are happening right now. So the level of uncertainty right now and the level of complexity is just high. It's just high for many people, and some people they're not able to adapt. In dealing with some sort of ambiguity, ready to to switch their mind from today and tomorrow, from one problem to another. So to me, look always for people that have this flexibility or adaptability in order to embrace all the changes that we're facing. That to me is the number one mindset that is required. The number two is a mindset about people. Because back to your question, look, the idea of leaders that are performing only by, making requests or forcing people to do things, directing, controlling. That is, we are way past of that. That is the old style of leadership. Right now, what people are looking for leaders. They are vulnerable. They are they're embracing, weaknesses, and they share openly weakness. They mean mistakes. They are there to listen the others. They're empathetic. That's what people are looking for. So, but that requires a massive shift in mindset in many leaders, especially the old generation of leaders. They grew up, with the idea that the stronger I appear, the better I will be as a leader and I'll get better results. I don't buy it. I don't buy this anymore. Maybe it worked in the 80s. I grew up with leaders like this. It doesn't work now anymore. But some leaders, they're still operating with that mindset.
Yep.
It's all about me. I need to show up. I need to demonstrate, that I'm Superman. It's all about me, blah blah blah, etc. Well, congratulations. Then if you have only 10% or 15% of engagement in your organization, so there is more, but I would say these are the two massive changes that I would like to see in leaders.
Hmm. What about the opposite side of that, Andrea? I see I see less of the dominant, hard ass for without, my apologies for the crude definition here. I see more the opposite where the leader goes out of their way to overly accommodate,
Hmm.
overly problem solve. They do anything to serve and let me help you fix that and let me go talk to so and so on your behalf, and they unintentionally contaminate the culture by being like an abused servant, I guess is maybe the best way to put it, where it creates a whole host of other challenges inside the company. I don't know if that's what you see on your side. I see it a lot. And where my job is to kind of help them not solve every problem, teach people how to solve their own problem, be there as a support system, but not necessarily as somebody that's going to clean up the mess all the time. Any observations in that regard in your world?
It's such an interesting point. Such an interesting point. And I'm glad you brought this up because um I, I think that is, it comes down to all this conversation about leadership styles. So I posted a few days ago about an interesting chart about how many different leadership styles exist. And I don't buy it either because I don't believe to leadership styles. I believe that leadership is altering the status quo, is generating impact. Doesn't really matter what the style you are embracing first. And second is, although, by the way, although he's respectful, he's fair, that this, I would say the basic condition to operate as a leader. But then every single style works for a specific time and for specific people. We need to be really flexible in the way how we embrace different styles. And many leaders that are not able to do that. They are more fixed. They only have one way. And yes, the conversation that is probably has happened in the last decade is okay, directing controlling, we can't do that anymore. We are hurting people or people leaving and whatever. So why don't we go to the other extreme and we become such a servant leaders and we are so nice with people. We are so social. We are welcome having insights. I'm not making decision anymore. Let them do it. Things. Oh, that's terrible. That's such a terrible advice. And I know that somebody, unfortunately, has really embraced that as if that is a way to be more effective with people. So when I do also assessment, as I probably you do too with leaders, we try always to evaluate what's the sociability element, meaning how much close you are with people, to your people. Because if you're too close to people, you guess what? You think you're doing a good job, but most likely, if I ask the same question to them, most likely, not always, most likely, people will say, I don't need a friend here. I need a boss that is courage enough to take a decision, tell me what's the direction I need to take. So, as always, leadership is balance, right? So, balance meaning be always able to adapt, to dance in the moment based on the situation. But I've seen what you just explained it. Maybe not necessarily with the CEO, but definitely on the C-suite. I've seen this, but definitely one level down, director, especially director level. That's what I see right now. And then if you talk to their bosses, the C-suite, they say, you know, the director doesn't take any decision. So you're right. That is an interesting point, and I think I wonder whether we are confusing be nice with people, be open, empowering people to be extremely servant to the point that we're not making any decision anymore and we're not making anything that he's supposed to do as a leader.
Yeah.
It's
So
such a
okay,
great point.
you say empowerment. I gotta key in on that. One of the reasons, and I've said this a million times, so I'll be quick about it, but one of the leadership program that I developed, it was for one of the banks in the local area. They asked me to if I did any leadership work. This was
Right.
10 years ago or something like that. And I said, yeah, I've got a lot of leadership ideas. They sit here, and I don't have a program. But if you want me to develop one for you, I will. But you got to pay for it. And so they
Right.
they let me do that, and I ran that program until they were bought. They were acquired by, or they acquired another bank and became something else. But I worked there for about 7 years as a leadership coach, and But I called the program Building and Leading a Self-Directed Team because I believe that if you can teach people to stand on their own, they're going to be at their best. And I believe that as a parent too. I've always focused with my wife on how do we teach these kids, we've got three, how do we teach them to take care of themselves? How do we
Right.
teach them to make decisions? How do we teach them to recover from mistakes? I just believe that that's the formula. Not to say that there are other formulas that don't work, but I believe in that formula. The flip side to that, though, is assuming that empowering another person is the right thing to do. And I used the analogy the other day with one of my clients. My daughter is 15. She gets her learner's permit in November to drive. And every day she asks, can I drive the car? Can I drive the car? And so it's not that I'm not open to it. I've just not made the time for her to practice in a parking lot. And I know it's against the law, but if you want to arrest me for it, go ahead, arrest me.
Right.
Anyway, so I said to her, we were out the other day, and I said, all right, I said, we were in the center of town, and there's a ton of traffic because there's a lot of road construction. And I said, and she's like, when am I going to be able to drive? I said, you know what? Why don't you drive right now? I'm going to pull over to the side of the road. You can drive us home. And I said, you're totally empowered to drive this car. And she just looked at me and she said, what are you talking about? I said, just get behind the wheel and take us home. And she's like, I don't know what to do, Dad. There's cars everywhere. There's a truck right there. There's the light. What do I do? I can't drive this car. I said, you've been asking me for, 3 weeks to drive. I'm just going to let you drive home. You're empowered to do it now. And she said, I can't do it. And she said, I'm not going to do it. And she just handed the key. And obviously, I wasn't going to let her drive home. But in that moment, I gave her the perception of empowerment. And she, in that moment, said, I don't know what to do with what you just said I could do. And I say that because I see that happen all the time at work. I see people that are told they're empowered and they don't know what to do with it. And there's that missed opportunity to figure out, do you know what it means to be empowered? Do you know what is expected of you? Do you know how to do that? If not, how do I help you do that? There's something missing. It's great, and I think if we can empower people legitimately, we'll all benefit. But there's something broken in that process. In From what I can see, where do you see that whole thing?
I'm with you. And I think there are three different root causes of what you described. So one is I wonder whether most of the time is a discharge of responsibility. Not definitely in your case, with your daughter, but I've seen this before. I've seen that what we call empowerment is actually just saying it's actually a delegation without clarity or responsibility, meaning I give it to you, you take it. But then I did not explain really what does it mean, what success looks like, first of all. And that I think is missing all the time. Let's clarify expectation. What does it mean for me to give you this task or this responsibility about something? How can we measure success about this? What's the perimeter of that sort of empowerment or delegation about it? So lack of clarity, discharge of responsibility. So is actually an element of poor leadership. It's not good leadership. It's actually poor leadership because you are empowering with words with something that people actually they don't know what to do about it. So it's absolutely that. So there is an element of do delegation without really clarifying what people expect it to do. And sometimes is people that are not ready to be really responsible for something. So that's not empowerment. Empowering is giving them tools to make sure they're ready to be powered about something. So, and that is transfer knowledge, that transfer of responsibility, that's clarity in the message. Then is maybe is a communication to people around them and say, this person now is responsible and that's what I want them to do. So it's all about leadership management. But if we look at all these cases that you mentioned, I'm sure if we go back and trying to do some lesson learned why that didn't work, we'll probably go back exactly to these 3 or 4 points. And it happened to me in the past. And going back to laziness, I think sometimes we are just lazy and we think, leadership is tick of the boxes exercise. So do I empower John? Yes, I empower John. So let me empower John that, okay, I did. I empower John. Now he knows what to do. Well, that's different. Now, here's the interesting thing, Dave. The question is, what conversation is going to happen next? Because sometimes there is not even a conversation to complete that sort of missing empowerment, meaning employees that don't have either the voice or they're not listened to explain, hey, sorry, this is not working. You said empowerment. I don't have the tools. I don't have responsibility. Nobody's listening to me. So there is something missing in the relationship between the boss and the leader and the person. And sometimes the leader is not even looking for some sort of feedback process to see, hey, how you're doing with the things I'm empowered with. Is it working? What is missing? How can I help you? So it's all about process that needs to be created when it comes to empowerment. So yeah, is something very common that I see too in organizations. Yes.
There's a couple of directions we could take that, because there's the whole component of defining what success is specific to whatever you're talking about. It
Yes.
might be, here's what this role is, and here's how we measure the effectiveness of this role. If it's sales, we measure your effectiveness by your ability to generate X amount of dollars in revenue every month. I'm making that up.
Yeah.
Or we measure your effectiveness in your ability to identify 10 new client opportunities every month. Whatever it is.
Whatever.
Just like in soccer, we measure your effectiveness as a goalie by your save percentage. That whether you like it or not, that's how we know if you're a good goalie. It's a marker of some sort that allows us to monitor the effectiveness of the role, the success of the person in the role. That to me does not happen nearly as often or as well as it could happen. There's a reluctance for a lot of organizations to define success in the moment. It might change. It's going to evolve over time as a company grows. The bar changes. The definitions do change and evolve. But many, due to busyness, maybe laziness, just exist in perpetuity without defining, say, success. So then all of a sudden, they expect, and then you talk about ambiguity, for example, as things change, and you ask, now you want the employee to do something else. If it's never been discussed and we haven't defined anything, now that employee feels anxiousness, resistance. This isn't my job. Since when do I have to do that? And it's because you use the phrase future ready. If we're not thinking future, as the business evolve and ambiguity, becomes the term of the day, it becomes harder and harder to bring people aboard. There's that whole definition of what success is. And then there's the other component, which you mentioned, which is allowing people the space to raise their hand and say, I don't know how to do that. Or can you help me learn that? Instead, they go into, okay, they either say yes, not knowing, or they blatantly resist and say, this isn't my job. I don't know how you comment on what I just said, because I just dumped a bunch of junk on you, but
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And by the way, to the last point, provided so that's what's going to happen, provided that they have the freedom and the opportunity to say no to something, because then that is another conversation, by the way. Because if people say they can only say yes, that is a yes for compliance. It's not a yes for commitment. It's not empowerment. If people have the ability to say no to something that is out of their control or is something they can't do it, that's different. That is a no for commitment. So I can't commit to do something like this that you asked me for because I'm not ready. I don't have the capability. I don't have the time. I don't have the resources. I don't have the skills. So let's have a conversation, because now I can understand what is missing from me as a leader to make you empower in what I'm asking you to do. That's really a conversation that is missing. But that requires as well the right trust and right environment for people to operate in that way, and then also for employees sometimes to be fair, right, to raise their hand and say, I'm sorry, provided that that sort of right environment is in place. Sorry, I can't do it. I can't just do it. I need your help in that. And also leaders be much more intentional and say, what do you think is missing for you right now to do that? How can I help you? So it's all valid. It's all very valid what you just described. I think that is exactly what is happening. And to your point about framing success, look, sometimes it's much more subtle than what we think. You made some example of very specific objective. People that you can give to people. There are numbers, right? There are costs to make or revenues, etc. But when it comes to creating a task or creating an initiative or leading an initiative, so the success is not necessarily, you need to get back to me in 6 months with that project completed, or you need to transform the organization. Most of the time, we're talking about something that is less quantifiable. It's difficult to say measuring that way, like, I want you to get to the specific outcome. Nonetheless, that doesn't it shouldn't stop people from having a conversation about what success looks like. And maybe success is simply put, is I want to make sure that you keep the conversation. You are accountable for keeping a conversation going across the organization about this initiative. You always be the focal point. You will not make decision until or unless you discuss it with me. So that's success, by the way. That's framing success. It's clarify expectations. The challenge happens when people they are not clear in the expectations. So that creates confusion. And in a world full of, as you said, ambiguity, good luck with that. So it really is the role of the leader is clarifying as much as possible every single piece. I know it's a lot of work. It's perceived a less of time that needs to be spent in empowering, educating employees. But that is the power of commitment. So if you want to create powerful commitment, people get things done, you need to be extremely clear in what you want them to do. So that's my piece of advice.
What role does ongoing communication play in that relationship?
Is
If
everything.
so, what does that look like in an ideal world?
It looks like with many, many more one-to-one, David, at the moment they're not existing. They don't exist. I coach again many people, and sometimes I get so surprised. But by the way, it doesn't surprise me anymore. Leaders they say, "Yeah, you know what? In coaching conversation, I think you're right. I think I need to have much more one-to-one with this person." So, okay, when was last time they had a conversation about it? Well, you know what? We have conversation, but never about this. So never to the depth, that we wanted. Never to clarify that. And incredible. It's incredible how many leaders of Fortune companies they don't have conversation with their people in that way. So that's another bad news for leaders. Now that you have less time available, you're gonna have even less time available if you really start having one-to-one with your people. And by the way, there are also team meetings where you need actually to clarify expectations. But that's the great and the good and the ugly as well of being a leader. You need to spend time with your people. And again, if you're lazy, if you feel that is not valuable because you have other priorities, good luck because you're gonna work on your own and you're never going to bring your team with you. So make a choice. I think at the end of the day, as long as you are aware about the pros and cons of your decisions, then make a choice. But then, be happy with whatever choice you make and what are the implications of that.
Yeah, and I think it ties into, and I'm sure you see this as well, where if that is not happening, the dynamic that usually sets in is an us versus them. It's
Yes.
and the leadership team can view the employee population as the opponent and vice versa. And if as soon as you start to view the other person or the other side as the opponent and not part of the
Yes.
collaborative solution, you're screwed. And so I hear that languaging a lot, and I've heard it for years and years and years, where one side views the other as a different side, and not part of the same team, whether it's
Yes.
department to department, business unit to business unit, or management to employee. It's me against you, and you're against me. And so, and I attribute that to a lack of fluid communication. It doesn't even have to be a formal one-on-one. If you and I work together, I'd expect that we'd have each other's cell phone, and I could drop you a text and say, Andrea, you got a minute, and you
Yeah.
just, what's up? We'd just be talking on the fly. I don't see a lot of communication on the fly informally. Do you observe that, or is that something that's missing as well?
I don't know. I think that really depends on individuals. I think, Dave. To some extent, I mean, maybe conversation on the fly, probably they are happening, at least in my world, a little bit more than before, just because technology is helping, online tools, etc. So I think probably what to me is missing more is the quality of the conversation.
Yeah.
Is the quality of the conversation. It's more about framing better what conversation people need to have, deciding in advance. That's missing totally. Deciding in advance what kind of conversation you want to have with people. And that's to me is one of those interesting uh, paradox in business right now. So we all know that we're going to succeed through people because humans and human systems is the only way for getting something done. That's it. It's not processes, it's not plants, it's not IT, it's nothing. It's human systems. And we all know it. And then the thing that we do less is interacting as humans, which is fascinating if you think about.
I know. It doesn't make any sense. Well, so think about what you said earlier about we were talking comparing and contrasting the different types of leaders, that dominant in your face bottom line person versus the one that goes overboard to accommodate, and how both styles can really compromise what needs to be said or what needs to be heard. So those difficult conversations that have to happen
Mm,
inevitably, those performance based or attitude based conversations that have to happen don't, or there's a lack of understanding, because if I'm a difficult person and you're afraid of me, you'll only hear my message as punishment. And
yeah.
or if I'm overly accommodating or agreeable as a leader, you might you might assume my message is, oh, it's not that bad, I'm okay, when really I just didn't have the courage to tell you the truth. So how what's where is the role of candor and honesty and critical feedback that isn't punishment? How does that happen when clear expectations aren't there, or ongoing communication isn't there? How does that compromise or contaminate that the necessity of a candid conversation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's go back to culture, isn't it? It's go back to where we started. It's creating the conditions as a leader in an organization where people can speak up, which that's really what we're talking about here. Speak up openly, transparently, without the risk of the fear of consequences.
Right.
And that's to me is the only conditions that you need in an organization. How to start? Well, look, if we're talking about on a unit level, you can create it. I mean, look, you can create your own culture in the team to operate with some specific criteria, principles as a team, regardless of what is happening around you. Now, I know it's a kind of creating some sort of silos within organization, but if you if you're a manager, you can't control the culture internally, but you can still influence it. You can influence it by adopting better behaviors. They actually bring better conversation with people, and then you can scale it. Through influence, through word of mouth and so forth. So that is one way. But and on the other hand, if you are sitting at the top table, who else can influence the entire culture or organization better than a leader that is sitting there? Maybe that's interesting new thing that for people might look like, oh, I thought it was different. By bringing to the conversation, I don't really believe CEOs can change culture. And that's, I know, is kind of a paradox. But because culture is a virus, is some sort of social phenomenon that you can't control it by just saying order people, change this, change that. It's way more complicated because social dynamics, interaction, conversations. So it's way more complicated than we think. However, CEOs can influence it and definitely influences. And the best way to do it is go talking to people, trying to understand what is really happening, in terms of what are the habits and habits and behaviors of people. So because once you know it, then you know maybe how you can influence conversations. So that is really short answer for a big question about candor, speak up, but we need to create a condition as a leader to make sure this conversation happen. Otherwise, what we are going to create, as the great Patrick Lancioni has always said, you're creating artificial harmony
Mm.
where people don't really say what they really think, just for compliance, for being nice with each other. That has a zero impact on performance.
So I posted something on LinkedIn today about the concept of grace, which, by the way, I rarely use that term, but I listen to a lot of podcasts and I read a lot of books, and I'm like, what exactly is grace? Like, and I start thinking about it. But it's, giving people the space to be human without judging them is kind of how I think about it. And I just don't. I think that if you're going to be responsible for other human beings, you've got to be prepared to give them the space to be flawed, knowing that you're flawed too. If leadership becomes about title and ego and power and authority and self-importance, then right off the bat, you've completely limited the potential of everybody in your charge. Everybody. Because now they're trying to live up to you or they don't want to look bad around you. So I guess my question is, how could you begin to influence the culture if for some reason it's stuck because of history? What's the first thing they could do to potentially undo that?
Right. To me, is understanding how culture get created. So you need to understand really what's the phenomenon that is on behind that. The phenomenon is like any sort of viral phenomenon where people start you embracing habits most of the time unconsciously. So they start to creating something and you are going to miss that. If you're missing, you don't know how the virality works. So it's really understanding the phenomenon, meaning if you see some managers reacting or behaving in some specific way, you need to understand what's the root cause, why that is happening, and why it still persists in an organization. So you need to start really creating for yourself first a mindset of discovery. When you really want to understand what is really happening before making some sort of judgment, say that because if people behave in a certain way, because something is happening, there is something is happening that creates some sort of virality, as many other phenomena in nature. So you need to understand what has triggered that behaviors in people. So then you can really influence conversation once you understand that. Because otherwise you're gonna be, confrontational with people, say, you're doing this, but I want you to do that. Yeah, but that's the train has already left. We
Right.
need to understand what is behind the reason why a specific behaviors became viral in organization. That's a starting point.
Okay. We only have a couple of minutes. A couple things. If anybody wants to talk to you directly about anything to do with leadership, what's the best way for them to communicate with you?
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, LinkedIn, we had a conversation. We have a conversation on LinkedIn. That's the best place to talk to me. I'm very active. I'm posting every day. So I'm there for people if they want to have a conversation. And then, of course, if they want to know more about the interviews I do, the podcast is a source for insights, the World Class Leader Show. And that's, I think, it's good enough for people.
Okay. And when do you expect the book to come out?
So the original plan was December, ready for Christmas. I think gonna be a little bit late because everybody literally wants to publish their book by Christmas. So I might probably fall into the January area, January moment. Yeah,
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it either way, and I appreciate your time today, Andrea. Thanks for taking an hour to kick around these ideas with me.
that was a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Dave.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.